Guidance is internal. Ignition sequence starts. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Permission to board. Permission to come aboard. Permission to board. Permission to bring me aboard. Permission to come aboard.
Welcome to the Permission Granted podcast. Here's DA.
All right, welcome inside the freshest edition of the Permission Granted podcast, everybody. DA with you. Thanks for being with us. Coming up, this is a bizarre week here aboard the Mothership because Mraz is on honeymoon 2.0, which means Planet Steve-O is running the Mothership. He is the executive producer this week. It's been weird. It's been woolly. It's been memorable. So he's going to join me coming up here in a few minutes, and we will talk about what's going on behind the scenes, none of which is good. But first, before we get to Planet Steve-O, we've got the author of a new book about the fringe leagues and old-time baseball that has surrounded our America's pastime for more than a century now. Really interesting stuff. Stories and anecdotes about the Negro Leagues or the real early days of baseball. Guys that had just a cup of coffee and kind of faded into Bolivian, if you are Mike Tyson. The author is Gary Sierdkowski, and he joins us here on the Permission Granted podcast. Gary, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You got it, man. Anytime. Thanks so much for joining us. I got to imagine just before you even write a book like this, you probably end up at a bunch of research wormholes, right? Where you go down one path and it swerves you into a million other paths as you kind of keep digging and digging and digging.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the fun part of it. It's, you could start off with learning about Babe Ruth, and the next thing you know, all of a sudden you find out that there was another guy that was better than Babe Ruth in Baltimore in 1914, and then you find out about him and where did his career go, and so you just keep getting buried and buried and buried into these things.
Oh, don't let us go out on that tease. Who was better at baseball in 1914 in Baltimore than Babe Ruth?
He was a fellow high school pitcher. He pitched for another Catholic school, and his name was Ford Meadows, and he was actually a better pitcher than Babe Ruth, but when the Baltimore Orioles wanted to sign him, the Jesuit priest that was in charge of his high school said, no, I don't want to get rid of him, so he put him on to this other guy that was with an associate high school in Baltimore called St. Mary's and said, why don't you go after this guy Ruth? He's even better. And that's how Babe Ruth got signed over Ford Meadows. And
so what happened to Meadows in the annals of history?
Well, he remained one of the best high school pitchers in Baltimore for another year, and then he went on to college, and he kind of flamed out. He had a really big attitude and would shoot his mouth off a lot. He eventually wound up playing for the Orioles. They signed him, I believe it was in 1916. He played a couple of games, and I believe he still holds the record for most walks in one inning in the International League. And he wound up enlisting in the First World War, and he got wounded and came back, and that was the end of his career.
We just hit 100 years since Babe Ruth, I believe, made his Major League debut. And at that time, as we all know, was such small ball and baseball. It wasn't the Sultan of Swat. It was move the runners along. So when you go down one of those research wormholes and you look at that, just how extraordinary was Babe Ruth's power and his ability to hit the home run for what that time was 100 years ago?
Well, he played in what they call the dead ball era, and they didn't change to the modern baseball that we have now until the early 1920s. So when Babe Ruth was hitting home runs, and when he was in spring training in 1914 with the Baltimore Orioles, he hit a home run that was so tremendous it went farther than one that Jim Thorpe had hit, and he originally hit the longest home run in this particular stadium. It was such a tremendous blast. People just couldn't get over that. See, Babe Ruth was already a great pitcher, but the fact that he was able to hit this dead ball that far people just couldn't believe it. And then when he got up to the Red Sox, they're still playing with the same type of baseball, and he's still hitting these things that just shots that nobody had ever seen before. Nobody had ever played the game like Babe Ruth.
You also dig into Moonlight Graham, and even if you're not a fan of baseball or hadn't done research on baseball for 100 years ago, if you've watched the movie Field of Dreams, Moonlight Graham takes on this incredible kind of ghostly aura. What did you find out about Moonlight Graham's life and career?
Well, just the fact that he had gone from, he was with the New York Giants. He was called up and got into one game. And John McGraw who was the manager of the Giants, wound up sending him down to the minors and said, "We'll bring you back." And he just never got that phone call. He just never got that call back up. And he drifted around for a few more years in the minor leagues and started going lower and lower, and then resumed his medical career.
Absolutely amazing. And then yet, just because of how he's portrayed in Field of Dreams, he takes on really a completely mystical kind of reputation that'll live forever probably, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the interesting thing about baseball that I find is, not just Moonlight Graham, there's thousands of guys just like him. There's a guy that's in my book. His name is Joe Staborski, and there's a famous photograph taken of the 1927 Yankees, the official team photograph. And for years, there's this guy that's in there, and either he's misidentified or it says unknown. And for many years, nobody knew who this guy was. And then it turns out that it's this fellow by the name of Joe Staborski. He was a college pitcher, and the Yankees signed him in the spring of 1927, and they brought him up for a few weeks to pitch batting practice and try to gauge where to send him in the minor leagues. He would just happen to be present that day in Yankee Stadium. He got his picture taken with the greatest baseball team of all time. And like I said, for decades, nobody knew who this guy was until his son stepped up and said, "That's my dad."
That's outrageous. And so that's the only way we know who that guy was, huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. It was just interesting just trying to find out about his career and, what became of him and, what he did before that. It's a really interesting story.
Gary Sieradkowski joins us here on the show, author of The League of Outsider Baseball. Hey, what's the story on Roberto Clemente actually having played a season that nobody even remembers?
Yeah, he was with his first professional season in the United States was with the Montreal Royals, which was one of the Brooklyn Dodgers AAA farm teams in the 1950s. This was in 1954. And they signed him, and his bonus at the time was over the limit. There was a special limit that was instituted back in the 1950s, so teams like the Yankees and the Dodgers couldn't keep signing people for a lot of money. If you signed somebody for over a certain amount of money, they had to play a couple of seasons in the major leagues. You couldn't farm them out. And so Sandy Koufax was a guy who fell into that category. That's why he played for the Dodgers for a few years, and he shouldn't have been there. He should have been in the minor leagues. Well, they did the opposite with Clemente. They stuck him in Montreal, and the rule was back then, if you did that, another team could come along and sign him. Well, for many years, people kept saying that the Dodgers tried to hide Clemente because they wouldn't let him play, and he only played like maybe half the games that season. And so a lot of people said the Dodgers were playing funny with it and trying to hide Clemente. It's not really true. It's Clemente couldn't hit right-handers, so they would only start him against left-handed pitching, and he didn't do too well. He only had, I think, 4 home runs that season, and there was Montreal at the time had probably 4 or 5 better outfielders than him. But because the Pirates scouts had saw him play in Montreal, they wound up picking him up at the end of the season, and next thing you know, he's in the Hall of Fame.
So Roberto Clemente, one of the greatest players, certainly of his generation, one of the greats of all time, wasn't a high draft pick, wasn't the highly touted property of the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was in the minors. He was in Montreal, and anybody could have signed him back in the 50s, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really scary to think what would have happened if he would have wound up in the Dodgers outfield in the mid to all through the 1960s. Could you imagine that?
Wow, that's kind of mind blowing. And the idea that Roberto Clemente could have been kind of the next in the African American kind of wave or Latin American wave, minority baseball players that had not had their chance before, that the Dodgers had Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, Joe Black, and all of them. Yep. That if Clemente would have followed them, I mean, that's kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think how would Dodgers still be in Brooklyn right now?
Yeah, just crazy. So also you did a lot of research on the Negro Leagues, which is always something that just kind of tantalizes the imagination because we never knew and will never know just how great some of these guys were. But you always hear the stories or the anecdotes from those that played back then of the Josh Gibsons, the Satchel Pages. But there's always stories about just some of the guys that we didn't even hear about. What are some of the interesting stories from the Negro Leagues that, the kind of these stories of Paul Bunyan-esque tales?
Well, there was a guy by the name of Leon Day, and I went to art college in Baltimore, and a friend of mine wound up introducing me to this old Negro League ball player named Leon Day, and I had been interested in the Negro League since I was a kid. And back in the 80s, I'd go through microfilm and stuff like that. So I get introduced to this man named Leon Day, and I go over his house, his row house. Nicest guy you ever want to meet. He takes me up to his little baseball room. He's got some mementos. He was a pitcher for a team called the Newark Eagles back from around 1936 up through World War II. Well, he's very quiet. You get him talking about stories. He's telling stories about all these great players, Josh Gibson, Larry Doby, Monty Irvin, all these guys he played with. And then, after going and visiting with Leon a couple of times, I start going to the library and looking up his box scores in the Baltimore African-American newspaper. Turns out this guy was almost as good as Satchel Paige or better.
Wow.
I mean, and he wouldn't talk about himself. I had to, after meeting with him many times, I just tried to drag it out of him. He just wouldn't talk about himself. But through him, I wound up meeting a lot of his contemporaries, and they would just sit there and tell stories about Leon, what a tough pitcher he was, how he wasn't afraid to throw at people. He used to throw from a stretch. He didn't have a windup. He was such an athlete. He was also one of the best base runners on the team. When he wasn't pitching and he wasn't in a rotation, he was out in the outfield. He was playing right field. I mean, he was just a complete ball player. And because the guy was such a reserved man, he just never spoke about himself like that.
What were the records, or what are the records like of Negro Leagues games, box scores, statistics? How complete of a picture do we have?
Well, the title of the book, The League of Outsider Baseball, the term outsider baseball was coined by a guy named Scott Simkus, who also wrote a book last year with that title, Outsider Baseball. And he goes back, and what he did was, it was quite brilliant what he did. He found the statistics of semi-pro teams that back, in the turn of the century up into World War II, the country was just littered with semi-pro teams, factory teams, or, former big league players that would play on this team, or guys that played in the high minors. So what he would do is find the statistics of these guys, what their abilities were in the major leagues or minor leagues. Then he would look at the games that these teams played against Negro League teams. So you can kind of gauge how a Negro League player is hitting against a guy that had just pitched in the major leagues. So if he goes 3 for 4 off of this guy, it kind of says something to his ability. Or if he goes, 0 for 6, then that says something about his ability. But this guy, Scott Simkus, kind of found almost like a Rosetta Stone to gauge how good these players were. So it could be done. It just takes a little digging.
When you were digging, or since you've been kind of researching the book or whatnot, today we are inundated with statistics and pictures and all of this, that you have pretty much a complete portrait or picture of just about anything you want, any game, any season, what have you. The longer you go back, I guess, to the turn of the century or whatnot, how incomplete are just baseball records or sporting records, whether it's newspaper kind of legend without using fact or stats, or kind of anything, anecdotes around it?
Well, it's hit or miss. On one hand, sports writing, if you look at a good paper from the 1920s, I mean, the quality of writing is just incredible. It's half of it's funny, half of it's serious, and back then people were stat crazy, even, like they are today. A bakery team, which is playing against the town team, they'll put all the statistics in a paper just because people were that interested. So it just takes some digging to find a lot of that stuff. But finding photographs of some of these players, especially the Negro League players or the guys that just played in the minor leagues, that's the hard thing. You can find some grainy newspaper articles and things like that. So when I was doing the illustrations for my book, that was kind of the fun challenge, was to not only find pictures of some of these guys to use as a model, but to make it so you bring it up to the same style and the same quality as you would for Ted Williams or something like that.
Wow. So in a modern day of metrics and sabermetrics, you're telling us that we've always been stat heads, going back 150 years.
Oh, absolutely. Now they get into the real serious nuances and things like that. They didn't have that sort of stuff back then, but people were just as thirsty for it.
Wow, that's really interesting. The book is The League of Outsider Baseball. An illustrated history of baseball's forgotten heroes. It's really, really cool. Baseball season is here. It's always got our juices flowing around here on the show, so this is cool. The author, Gary Sieradikowski, joining us here on the show. Well, Gary, this was a lot of fun, man. Best of luck with the book. I appreciate you dropping on by.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks to Gary. Really interesting stuff on the book. And Planet Steve O'Maralia joins me here now on the crossover. Steve, what's going on?
Oh, I'm doing great.
Are you?
I am.
Are you really?
I am.
We're taping this now before the show on Thursday.
Correct.
So we've had 3 shows in the books.
So far, so good.
I don't know about that.
What do you mean you don't know about that? I know about that.
We've got 2 more to go the rest of the week.
Yep.
You've had some highs. You've had some lows.
I haven't had that many lows.
There's been some.
I don't feel like I've had any lows.
Just assembling this podcast has been a real low.
You're right, it has been, but it's been fun. I've learned a lot, and I'm enjoying it.
Well, I'm sure you are. The problem is we got to get the job done here.
I know, and we also have to get on the air soon.
Yes, we do. But we've gotten on the air the first 3 nights, so that's
so
good.
far, so good.
What would you say over the first 3 nights? Now, for those that don't know, Mraz is on Honeymoon 2.0 in St. Thomas.
He doesn't even know where that is.
He has no idea geographically where that is. There's no doubt about that. Oh, and by the way, you can only subscribe to the podcasts by simply going to iTunes or on SoundCloud and searching The DA Show CBS Sports. You'll see PGP number and then whatever episode this is, because this is all off of the air stuff that you won't get for our normal show podcast.
See, I already threw you off because with Mraz, there's no doubt you would have had that in the first segment.
There's no doubt. Yes, exactly.
With me,
right.
Anything goes.
Yeah, that's what we're learning here. So what's the most memorable moment of the first 3 shows thus far?
I would have to say the cell phone failure that I've dealt with thus far with my guests, 2 of the 4, so that's 50%.
Yeah, 50% have had crappy
of the
cell
first 2
phones.
days. Who knows what we get tonight if we have any guests. I mean, I'm still working on that, and we've got about 25 minutes to go for those that are counting.
You really like to let this thing go to the last minute.
No, I don't. I'm actually very prepared. I'm very organized. That is the type of person I am. I'm a very clean person, if you will. I don't know, D. I mean, listen, I'm trying. I've reached out to a bunch of people. We're trying to get these people on, but sometimes they don't get back to you.
Is it showing that you don't have a lot of pull, really?
Maybe that's what it is. I think Mraz has really just established himself. I mean, he was a pop. Yeah, I mean, you have to drop like a pop culture phenomenon.
I don't think our guests know that he's a pop culture phenomenon.
I think they do. I mean, he's cried several times on the air. He's been interviewed by multiple news stations across the country because of this nonsense.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
I don't know. I mean, feel like he just does. He has that pull.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case.
I give you the credit for that, though.
Of making him a pop culture phenomenon.
You have made him. There's no doubt about that. If he was working, with somebody else, I won't name any names, but, Do
you think he realizes just how I have personally helped build his brand?
No, I think he's way too big-headed.
Yeah, he thinks it's just him.
Yeah, he's like, you know what? I'm the fat guy. I'm the one that brings the funniness. And really, no, it's Raz, you're wrong.
He's always had a bit of an ego.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So it's
strange for somebody that took 5.5 years to get through community college, right?
To finish, yes, a 4-year degree.
Okay, not community college, but a 4-year degree, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he's a dope. I mean,
But we love him. He's a lovable dope.
He's an easily lovable, charismatic, puffy dope.
Puffy being the operative word there.
Very puffy. So, yes, the most memorable moment of this week thus far has to be Rick Barry, NBA Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
The first hour of the first show. And he's going to talk to us about the NBA playoffs, and he's getting on a flight to Africa. And
great for him.
Yeah, that is great for him. And while he's talking to us, he's putting his baggage in the overhead compartment.
First when I called him, he goes, all right, well, let's do this. I'm getting on the plane. And I said, all right, well, your cell phone sounds great, so let's do this. I forgot about the baggage. I mean, if you're Rick Barry, do you have carry-ons?
Sure, you're going to Africa. That's a long flight. You need the laptop, or you need the magazines or the books or the iPad.
The iPhone to listen, to DA on CBS, on our CBS Sports Radio app. I guess you're right.
That's a good promotion right there. That's a good promo.
I do my best.
So we had that. That's been interesting. I would say that it's been kind of a roller coaster of the shows.
Of emotion.
Yes.
A roller coaster of emotion.
Yes, the shows have gotten on the air. We've had the guests come on. Some have been okay, some have been good, some of which we can't understand because they're in the cabin of a...
I would say that they've been quality guests that make great points and that are, all right, what you guys don't know right now is that DA just coughed. He hit the cough button and cleared his throat, and it distracted me, so I lost my train of thought.
That distracted you?
It did.
I mean, you must have the attention span of a gnat.
I do. No, so what were we saying?
I mean, that was less than 30 seconds ago. It was like 10 seconds ago. We were talking
I know,
about...
but I'm looking right at you, and you use the cough button, and then all of a sudden, there I am.
Well, you're a real radio pro.
That'll be in the laugh montage.
There's no doubt that's in the laugh montage right there. By the way, I love the laugh montage.
Oh, it's great. That might be the best one yet. I don't... Seriously, what were we talking about?
A roller coaster of emotion.
Yeah, it has been for me. I mean, I'm stressed out about things.
You're so stressed.
I am. I want this to go well. I want to get an A. Damn it, I want an A.
You see, here's the thing. You have the effort's been there.
I hope so. I mean, see, I've gotten 1,000 more gray hairs since I started working on
the
this
effort's
show.
been there. It's just that you let a lot of things drop between the cracks.
No.
Yes.
Okay, fine. All right, I don't.
You're so adamant to fight that point, and then within 5 seconds, you're like, well, yeah, no, that's a good point.
Well, you brought up to me right before we started the podcast that I didn't that I don't tweet out the guests. Well, listen, you guys know from listening to this podcast, at the end of every time I do this with Mraz, he says, and Moralia or Planet Steve-O doesn't have a Twitter, so you can't follow him because he's a dope and he hasn't joined the 21st century yet.
Right.
I don't have a Twitter, so I'm not up to date on that. I guess I really should be. I actually have a Twitter.
You do.
But I don't tweet from it, and nobody knows my Twitter handle. I follow you. You're going to have to scroll through it and figure out which one is me.
So it's not your real name.
It's not my real name.
So
it's not anything close.
You just want to hide.
I want to hide in the weeds.
What's your avatar?
The egg.
You have the egg?
I have the egg.
That's so pathetic.
I have the egg.
Oh, that's so pathetic. That's so pathetic.
I don't want to give it away.
So why do you just creep in the weeds of the internet?
No, I don't creep because I don't tweet. I don't tweet at people.
Yeah, you're just watching. You're leering. You're like a voyeur.
Of course, you have to monitor this stuff. I mean, listen, I wouldn't have a job if I didn't monitor the news, right?
Yes, I know, but
so that's what I use it for. Nobody cares what I say.
Well, that's fine, but you really should have
no, because then I'll be getting death threats from people like Mraz does on Twitter.
Mraz does get death threats. One of the best moments of last week was Mraz was in, you were in, and Mraz is like, "Hey, look at this Twitter chain that happened." And it was, I think it was the listener or the caller, Leslie in Fort Lee.
Leslie in Fort Lee, it was.
Fort Lee,
I
New
can
Jersey.
do a great impression of him.
Okay.
Jody Mack! Jody, let me tell you, Derek Fisher should be fired. He's always calling for people's heads.
Yeah, so Leslie in Fort Lee, New Jersey, is a regular caller and listener at WFAN in New York. And Mraz, before he was the producer here for my show, was a part-time producer at The Fan. So he must have call screened Leslie in Fort Lee before and kind of gotten to know, because Leslie is a chronic on WFAN. So
he is, too, on CBS Sports Radio with Moose and Maggie from my days there. And so I know Leslie. I've spoken to him. He loves me.
Yeah, he loves you, but he hates Mraz.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because of the WFAN days or he was screening for my show once. I know Leslie called in like the first week I was on the air on CBS
and
overnight.
Did you let him on?
Yeah, let him on, but I mean, he has some terrible points, so I probably ripped him off.
Let me tell you something. Derek Fisher should be fired.
You know what ended up happening? I think he came on. It was a pretty terrible call. And then the next time he came on, or he called, we left him on hold because we had a ton of other better callers.
Oh, so you're the reason why Mraz is getting death threats.
And I think that Leslie...
Or death wishes, I should say. They're not threatening to kill him.
Right. So I think we left Leslie on hold because we just had better calls. And we're like, oh, Leslie called in again. And I think I even told Mraz, because this is what I normally do with callers. I go, look, if we're not going to talk about that, I'll tell Mraz, hey, tell that caller we're not going to get to him for like an hour or, for just so they don't hang on for no reason.
With me, it's a free-for-all, though.
Yes, with you, I mean, this week is you just take what you can get at this point.
It hasn't been that bad.
So,
I've tried to be focused. I have been focused.
I did to a certain degree. So last week, Mraz is like, check out this Twitter chain. And Leslie and Ford Lee mentions Mraz.
Mraz with another guy in the conversation.
And is not even talking to Mraz. He's talking to the other guy about
him. He's like tweeting, this ass at Mraz CBS to promo Mraz's Twitter, and he is a jerk or something like that. That's how it starts.
It was worse than that, yeah.
And then the next guy is like, yeah, he's awful. He's the worst. And then the other guy says, well, I hope he dies.
No, Leslie and Ford Lee said something like, he's probably not long for that job.
No. No. I remember exactly.
Okay.
He said, well, based on his eating habits, I'm sure he'll meet his end soon.
Oh, yeah. and Mraz is mentioning all of this.
Oh, yeah.
They're not even talking about...
So it's going right to him.
So it's not even talking to Mraz. It's about Mraz meeting his end. Because...
And then they said, after meeting his end, which is, it's a pretty funny terminology to go along with it all. I mean, if you heard these people, we're talking about these guys in Fort Lee. But, geez... So the one guy goes, yeah, and I'll celebrate that day. It's terrible. And Mraz is like, they don't even know who I am. And then they start tweeting about how terrible of a person he is. But they say he's a worse producer. And I'll tell you what, right now, you might give Mraz crap, but boy, hell of a producer.
You've learned this week that he does a lot.
He does a lot, and I knew that he did a lot. I think we spoke about this.
Yeah.
4 or 5 podcasts back. I know how much he does. He's taught me a lot. In all honesty, I've grown as a producer a lot since I've worked on this show, just by learning from him, essentially, with a lot of things. So, in this week, obviously, my hands are in the dirt. I know what's going on, and he does a lot to keep this show afloat.
Yeah, Mraz comes off
keep it in orbit. If we're going to stay with the theme.
Mraz comes off as a bit of a, just a clown a lot. He's like the class clown.
Sure.
But when we started on the overnights, like the way you produce at WFAN is totally different than the way you produce at CBS. CBS shows on the network are just much more detailed and layered, and there's a lot of production elements, and especially for our show, there's a lot of production. There's a lot of...
Which has been my biggest challenge.
A lot of ancillary stuff with the podcast and the tweeting. Like, the fan is very bare bones when you produce. You're basically screening a lot of calls and, like, booking a guest.
Yep.
So Mraz came from that, and there was a lot to learn for him right from the outset. But, little by little, he got to speed. And we'll talk about this, like, every so often. I was pissed at Mraz for a while.
Really?
Because he wasn't up to speed. And I was like, we need to do it this way. And so him and Brock used to hate my guts when we first started.
So I have a question, just to get back to, how I've done as a producer in my first week. How does that compare to Mraz and say, we'll be fair and say his first, month? I think that's equitable, right? With the amount of shifts that I've worked for you and not necessarily doing it all, but kind of seeing how it's done. In his first month, how do I stack up from that? Would he be getting B's or would he be getting C's?
He was worse.
Worse. Look at that.
He was worse, and I'll tell you why. Because there's way more to do now than there was when he first started.
Okay.
Like, there's way more on your plate this week than there was on his plate the first two months.
Okay, what about the first year?
Well, we didn't do podcasts.
Oh.
These, like, individual podcasts, which has to be edited and uploaded and titled.
Well, that's going to be a big part of my grade by tomorrow. Or is it tonight?
We want to get this up tonight.
Okay. I guess tonight it is. I'll stay late tonight. Letterman's not on. I was
last
rushing
night
home.
You bolted out of here soon as the show was
we
over.
Walked out together. Let's be honest.
I know.
As a matter
I bolted
of fact,
out too to go. I wanted to see Letterman as well.
Yeah, which was great, wasn't it? I really enjoyed it. We'll talk about it more tonight on the show, and that's going to be part of this, of course. But yeah, it was. I don't know. I've always been a Letterman guy. I've liked Dave. My first memories of Dave were waking up in probably first or second grade, and in the morning at my local CBS affiliate, I guess, in upstate New York, my parents always watched the guy in the weather, and they would do the top 10 list. That particular affiliate would do the top 10 list. So I remember eating my bowl of cereal, essentially getting ready for school,
And they replay
watching
the top 10 list.
And we'll talk tonight, I guess, about our favorite top 10s, maybe, because I've got one that just sticks out in my mind.
We're going to talk about Letterman tonight.
Okay,
yes,
great.
We're going to talk about Letterman. So anyway, let's go back just to wrap this thing up. Way more on your plate now than there was at on
let's
Mraz's
come
plate.
full circle. Orbit back into the mothership, Steve.
Yeah. So no, you've pulled your weight. It's just that a lot of stuff has slipped between the cracks, but there's a lot of stuff for you to get. So overall, we're getting there. Tonight should be fun. Tomorrow night, I'm sure, is going to be a blast because it's a Friday.
Oh,
so
always is.
We should be good to go.
We got some P-Funk on the table tomorrow.
Got
We're going
some
to be ready
P-Funk,
to go.
Billy Giacalone.
And I'm really pushing for A's the next 2 days. We'll
Okay,
see
good.
what happens with the guest list tonight.
Yeah, we
and,
need the
That's
guests.
going to be a
We
big
need-
part of that because I have a feeling if I only get one person, I'm going to drop down to a C, and I just can't have that
Yeah,
on
we
my
need the
resume.
second guest.
Never gotten a C in my life.
Need the second guest.
Believe that?
That is kind of surprising. Never a C.
Really? All right, I got a C.
You're so
I
proud
dropped,
of
I
this.
dropped the
You
class.
can't believe that I
dropped the-
suggested that you had one.
I dropped the class, so it wasn't on my transcript.
Oh.
All right.
Well, okay.
All right, we're going to wrap up on that note. DA, thanks for having me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Welcome into Side B of the Permission Granted podcast. I am not Sean Mraz. It's Steve Moralia filling in for Mraz this week. If you don't know who I am, you've been living under a rock since January 2nd. That's when I started with the DA show. And I am joined today by Billy Giacalone.
That's
Billy,
correct.
how are you?
I'm here, Steve. I'm excellent.
So, Bill, it's been a fun week, I would say, on the Mothership.
It has. It has.
And I just wanted to get your thoughts on my performance so far. As you know, DA's been grading me every night. I
you're
haven't
right,
gotten
right.
higher than a B+. What do I mean? That could change tonight or tomorrow. This is Wednesday for those of you who are listening another night. So, Bill, what do you think?
Well, see, here's the thing. Once I heard the DA was going to be grading you on your performance, my goal, based off of my experience with the DA show dating way back to the overnights, was to get you the A. Was to make you comfortable enough
You're a team player.
to get you the A. Right, exactly. Because I'm not being graded. So I could just, comfortably run the board, get you the A. So we still have 2 more days. We have 2 more
we have
days.
2 more days to get that A. Now, how about my producing style in contrast to Mraz running the Mothership? Obviously, we spoke that I'm a little stressed. I stressed to get that epic fail done. I want the show to go well. How does it compare, to the early days? Because you were an early member of the Mothership.
Correct. I was the original fill-in on the overnights.
That's right.
Whenever Kenny Brock of the formerly of the Wheels of Steel was out, I was the go-to.
Well, I'll tell you what, you've done a great job. You know your stuff.
Thank you.
You're good on the Wheels of Steel. I don't have to worry about anything over there, so you do actually take a lot of the pressure off of my shoulder.
Thank you.
But getting back to Mraz, I mean, you see, he stands up a lot. I'm not a stander when I produce.
Does he stand up a
He
lot?
stands up a lot because I always see his gut hanging over.
He does have a
table.
gut.
So
And, the funny thing about Mraz is that he's trying to lose weight, and I think he's succeeding a little bit, but he's still
not after this honeymoon 2.0.
No,
that he's got
definitely
going
not
on in
after
St.
that.
Thomas.
What do you think he's eating down there?
Oh, God. I mean, he's probably on the buffet line, going through crab legs, who knows? I don't want to know. It'll probably disgust me.
Can you picture Mraz laying on the beach with a Corona?
I don't want to.
There we go.
I
All
think he would go for something a little bit heavier, though.
A heavier, maybe like a Guinness?
I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe like a pale ale. Not. I don't know. Something a little heavier. Something with way more calories than a Corona.
All right, well, that's besides the point. I also have experience working with you while you're producing.
That's right. Billy does. As many of you know, many of the loyal listeners out there to CBS Sports Radio, I produce shows on the weekend, and Billy does usually at least 65-70% of the shifts that I work. So you knew what you were getting into when you had me, producing.
I did, and I also factored in the sometimes hectic nature of putting stuff together for the DA show.
Oh,
how that could be a little
the
stressful.
topic sheets. I put together this big, long topic sheet for DA. Billy doesn't read it, but that's besides the point.
Well, that's okay. You know what? I just need to make sure the show runs smoothly.
And Bill, I really do think that it is running smoothly. The show, that is, of course. I think that we complement each other pretty well. You're a big NBA guy.
I am.
I'm not so much.
No.
I'm a big MLB guy. I'm the resident seam head is what DA refers to me as on this show. So I'm all about the bats and the balls. As Mraz would say, as we're getting ready to pack up and leave, pack up the bats and the balls. But you're big with the NBA. You pay attention. You're really into it. So you've really helped me along with a lot of that stuff, especially putting together certain segments of the show.
That's correct. And you know what? I would say DA is a well-rounded sports guy, but he's also a big NFL guy.
Yeah, so we've got a majority of the bases covered.
And when Mraz is here, he's a big hockey guy.
He is, and you know what? Mraz is crying right now after that Rangers loss last night. Did you catch any of that game?
Not at all.
I did not catch at all.
I did not catch 1 minute of it.
Well, I was actually driving home last night, and I heard Mraz crying from St. Thomas.
Wow.
But then I saw a really hot chick cross the street
and
in a Ranger shirt. Great ass. Wow, she was absolutely drop dead gorgeous. I almost pulled over and offered her a ride home, but I think people would have found that to be a little creepy.
But see, a little bit. Just a little. Now, what would you have done with your current, I would say, girlfriend, right?
Well, I guess we could, not officially, but you're right. That's something I certainly need to consider if I want to take it to that next level.
And you can't be picking up random Ranger fans like that, especially,
That's a fact. All right, so Bill, getting back to the show and how it's running, is there anything that you don't like what I've done so far?
The only thing I'll say is it's not too big of a deal.
Well, listen, I take constructive criticism very well.
Lay
it all on me.
Maybe you could cut the epic fail clips during the breaks.
What does that have to do with anything? I mean, why? Because I'm out of the studio too long. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Too long.
A little on the lengthy side, I would say, yes.
Yeah, you and DA have been busting my balls about this all week long. Listen, I move at a slower pace, I would say, when it comes to stuff like that.
But I will. Well, that's good. Well, you care about the show. You care about the show very much.
I care about the show. I want everything to go beautifully.
And the one thing I will say is this: we've also had Alex, who's been training on the board this week.
Yeah, Alex Metz. You will start hearing that name filtering on CBS Sports radio shows, as I believe he could be a rising star here at CBS.
He could be. He knows his stuff very well. He actually produced one of the Sports Minutes yesterday. He did a very good job.
Great.
And he's also producing for Ken Carmen till 2 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday.
Hold on. Now, I do impressions of everybody around here. I've got Doug Gottlieb. I'm Doug Gottlieb with this CBS Sports Minute. I do him pretty well. I do Ken Carmen pretty well now, thanks to your tutelage, I would say. Back on CBS Sports Radio, Ken Carmen with you until 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Okay, so that's Ken Carmen.
There we go.
I can do Jim Rome, but everybody can do Jim Rome. This is Jim Rome with a CBS Sports Minute.
That's not terrible.
Not terrible. I also have done impressions of DA. As you know, when other hosts have been filling in for DA, I've done impressions of him. I always do that. Happy Friday! Stuff like that.
And you've done a good job at it because DA is a hard voice to impersonate.
Yeah, so DA, I don't really have his voice down, but I have his mannerisms down.
You do.
So getting back to Alex Metz, anyway. What's the problem with Alex? I mean, he's been in our studio, in our control room, as the show's going on, shadowing Billy to figure out what needs to happen. And what are your takeaways on that, Bill?
Well, he's also had board trading last weekend with Joe D, who's also another rising star here.
Yep, Joe D.
And the thing is,
I call him Giuseppe, but
that's actually how he signs his name.
That's his
Giuseppe.
real name.
But you can't really be saying that around here. I mean, I'm Italian too, but
all right.
No one really wants to call him Giuseppe. Anyway, Steve, you won't let Alex get any board reps on the DA show.
I won't. Absolutely not. It's too much too soon. Maybe he can send it to break. How does that sound?
All right. We could work with that.
The break has to be armed, though.
It does have to be armed.
I'm very big on arming the break.
Yes, you are.
We have a button, not that any of you care, that when we have to press it to send it to commercial. It's all inside radio. I guess that's what the point of this permission granted podcast is. But Let's see. What else do you have on the table, Bill? What are your plans for this weekend? What are you up to?
Well, speaking of which, there was one time you didn't arm the brake, right?
There was, but that was a long time ago. We don't need to go there.
No? All right, let's not
So,
do
Bill, tell me what you're up to this weekend. Are you going to be here working at CBS Sports Radio?
I am.
Memorial Day weekend, and you're going to be here at CBS Sports Radio. I would normally be as well, but I won't be this week because I've done 5 days here on the DA show.
You have, and I'm actually going to be going on my 7th day until I get off again.
Wow, look at that. I refuse to do that, believe it or not.
I know.
That's probably why you're doing 7 days.
That's true. It's part of the commitment, Steve. You got to do what you got to do.
You're absolutely right. You got to do what you got to do. But I will be heading up to Connecticut for a nice little barbecue, Memorial Day barbecue. I will be suntanning. I will come back here looking nice and burnt.
To a crisp.
Maybe to a crisp, yeah. And I'm just looking forward to it. I mean, this is the time of the year. I mean, you walk outside, everything's beautiful. It's great.
Today not so much, though. Today's a little cloudy. It was raining a little bit.
Yeah, but what can you do? You got to mix those in. This weekend, though, in New York City, it's supposed to be fabulous. I'm looking forward to it. And, I just this has been quite the week on the DA show, so I'm really looking forward to relaxing this weekend.
And as you should be. As you should be. But I will be on the board this weekend from 6 at night till midnight.
Oof.
with Stu Kovacs, who's going to be producing your usual time slot.
Now, why aren't you producing that? I feel like I've groomed you well enough to produce.
You have, and you know what? I've worked your shifts before, but I think David might be given, might be
trying to filter everybody in.
Not only,
so to speak, give everybody a chance, see what they've got.
Right, and not only that, I've had a long week here on the DA show, so maybe he's kind of going,
What do you mean you've had a long week? So you're saying that you've had to really carry me is what you're telling me.
Well, Steve, the one thing I will say is that I have had to carry you quite a bit.
Jeez.
Especially with the reads, which seemingly never get done.
So this is why you're stressed. The reads are stressing you out, which is why you need a break, which is why you can't produce this week.
And you know why? Because on
unbelievable.
Well, see, on the log sheet, my name is signed on the log sheet.
Fact.
So
my name is signed to the show, though.
Your name is signed to the show. Well, actually, DA's name is signed to the show.
So is mine. It's the small font underneath it.
That's correct. But you know what, though? I think Dave might be giving me a break a little bit. That way I could put all my effort into the DA show.
Well, I appreciate that. I know DA appreciates that. That should do it for the Permission Granted podcast. Remember, you can follow DA on Twitter. His handle is @DA on CBS. That's DAONCBS. Billy, where can the listeners find you on Twitter?
You can only find me on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on anything else. It's @Billy, spelled regularly, BILLY. GIAC_CBS.
Very good. Also follow DA on Facebook, Facebook.com/The DA Show, on YouTube, YouTube.com/The DA Show. I believe DA just uploaded a video of the voice of the Chicken Challenge, Jacob Wilkins.
Really good time having him do the anchor slot.
Great stuff with him doing the anchor stuff. That's right. And also, we are on SoundCloud, which is how you got this podcast. So if you got here, you know that all of our shows are fully podcastable, all 4 hours of the DA show, commercial free. Billy, thanks so much for jumping on.
Thank you, Steve. And I will say one more thing. I actually messed up my Twitter name.
How do you mess up your own Twitter name?
Because you know what? To be honest with you, I don't know.
All right, well, plug yourself. What's your Twitter handle?
It's Billy, GIAC, CBS. No underscore.
No underscore.
I thought I had
eliminate that underscore. We got it squared away. Bill, thanks as always. I'll see you soon.
Let's go do the show.
Take care.